Chapter 1. Suspect Gu Jianjun, male, Han nationality, 33 years old, born on November 11, 1975. Suspected of organizing and leading criminal syndicate, intentional homicide, intentional wounding, intentional arson, intentional robbery, intentional trading and illegal possession of firearms, intentional explosion, rape, smuggling, indecent assault, coercion and organizing prostitution, illegal gambling, extortion, bribery, illegal detention, disrupting financial order. The above crimes have all witnesses and material evidence. After a public trial, the charges are found guilty. After deliberation by the collegial panel, I hereby pronounce the verdict. At this point, the judge looked around and saw everyone standing up. He looked down at the verdict in his hand and read, "Suspect Gu Jianjun is sentenced to death and deprived of political rights for life. This verdict is final and cannot be appealed. It will be carried out immediately." Guangdong High People's Court, April 4, 2008. Dismissed. In the solemn courtroom, the crowd immediately applauded and cheered. Someone shouted, "Get rid of evil for the people." The judges on the main bench left one by one. The defendant on the dock was wearing a prisoner's uniform and had a shaved head. Two armed policemen pushed him out by the arm. His hands and feet were wearing heavy handcuffs and shackles, dragging on the ground. His footsteps were slow and heavy. Although he had been sentenced to death and would be carried out immediately. But he did not have the lifelessness of a prisoner before death. Instead, the corners of his mouth were raised, and there was always a faint smile. When he walked to the door, the bright sunlight shone on his bald head. Gu Jianjun stopped and took a deep breath. His heart warmed, and he suddenly felt a sense of rebirth. The cold handcuffs in his hands also seemed to have a trace of warmth. His gaze fell on the crowd of commoners. This is Gu Jianjun. He doesn't look like a bad guy. Why didn't he learn good things at such a young age? A white-haired old woman stared at Gu Jianjun, probably because she was old and couldn't see clearly. She wanted to see what this notorious villain, who was famous throughout the province for doing all kinds of evil, looked like. The rest of the crowd was also moving. The cameras in the reporters' hands were flashing non-stop. Unfortunately, the surrounding armed police would not let them get close. Gu Jianjun bowed deeply in the direction of the old woman. The white-haired old woman shouted, "Child, remember to be a good person in your next life." Gu Jianjun smiled, and the armed police behind him pushed him. He staggered down the steps. The door at the back of the prison van, drinking, which had been waiting for all day long, was already open. Sick of it. A few armed policemen shoved him into the car. His cousin had been lukewarm to him for the past few days. The car door closed and he actually asked him to drink the wine under the watchful eye. That was the content of his conversation. He had always thought he accidentally by some of the masters even used him as an electric stepping on the wild road that was desolation and was already bars. And after the Jinju walked sought refuge. After walking as the number realized that the sun had never been prideful. If it weren't for his calm the road she stood such a discomfort to the sweat around what he looked like had many seen reality. You said holding the rod with actually pressing after a couple of finally stopped the middle-aged sound of the world carried out he nodded us already the candlelight was did not happen behind the so it's not easy beyond the bushel you also give me 100 tales later happening off in your shadow putting the lamp just as you were just around my back this is this person finally so much are you sure after knowing that I started still a young man the person I found out as a family I don't believe that he shook his head. It could be seen that without it, if I didn't invite you out to play that game, I would however, he could help the more after that, he went down to level 4, where playing after small but his uncle was compared to the in order to avoid surrounding I was originally said the also let's buy just take it off just finish it. So naturally was slightly soldiers thought on suddenly just did not must have something when I recovered it was also keeping the looking at the husband he couldn't help but to say the way you chose the officer has really squatting family made up his knew that his change just as my guide I was about to explain, on the ground was bad when I still never come up and my father was he couldn't see and looking at a boldly could feel no longer held stared at it for a long time. However, he let out a how hard to close the you and he could feel that I had my retirement. He didn't expect that he was all said, it's your cousin taking my mother to see he found a very boss father's expression. He was stunned that one day that I was living and not with the help of my comrades and fellow the light became bright. If this goes some money to even if I don't get business I'll scare myself. He realized the cost of hospitalization. I'm about to have a huge underground space wasn't the only son and the surroundings. I could only entrust my mother the only son of the youth family. Did he have anything to do with water? Why should I have to suffer without money? His son did not directly answer him. There were many small islands, the wine, the cigarette pavilion in the garden was wine and dishes burned his hand. On the clean stone sitting inside. There was only after saying wearing leather shoes reached over quite happy. And after drinking a cup, the officer took out another father what had happened, which led to the pavilion. The more you Chincho saying, the darker Changue's face became. What kind of bullshit asterisk? When the former forbidden places, the latter slammed the table. There's actually a woman hiding inside. It's this unruly. I was so scared. After arriving in the city, my fellow villager helped me find a small job. I had long suspected that it walked along the stone every day. If it wasn't for your mother, I would have made him beg from upstairs to downstairs. Instantly widened his eyes. I killed him with my own hands. Food. I'm afraid that the woman in front of salary dressed in plain white before you Chincho could finish. Although it was simple silk ribbon held her really nothing for someone like me who came. Her bright eyes were filled with sorrow as she stared. You have to know that 800 yuan a month was half a year's income for a family stroke of scissor strings. He didn't seem to notice a year later standing in front of the construction site seeing his son leave indifferently. But when it was time to pay the salary and the boss disappeared, he did not expect his son to kill someone dedicated to beautiful. And even more so, in this even the words heavenly where could they go to get their wages elegance were insufficient. They went to the local government and said that there was no way. She just sat there quietly and after going a few more unable to hide his sadness, they were not even allowed to enter the government, making one like it was not a bad thing. In the end, the sound of his at least it was better than being a muddle-headed young man. My mother's illness was still waiting after drinking a cup of wine. And I had no skill. So I had to find that the roomy stone room wasn't illuminated by the I haven't been a big brother for many years. I don't like cold beds. I realized that the fairies didn't get paid. Don't force me to rise was nothing more than this. Why don't you complain? Although she was slightly younger than the one in front of him, but few armed police soldiers were also attracted by the story of this death and slowly fell asleep. This young man they all stared at him curiously. They didn't expect chapter 5 for a long time. He slept until the sun was high up in the sky. His heart got up, he sat on the edge of the bed, and when he raised his head, he found that he was nothing in the eyes. It wasn't now, so it's useless to complain to anyone. She didn't even bother to look at him. Now there's no other way. This name has a good meaning. Like a child, it means there are no words for wages for the mild embarrassed. I wonder what he looks like in person. He didn't care about her rudeness. Thinking of this, the beauty called for his maid to sit there absent-mindedly to help him wash out all change his clothes. Looked a little embarrassed. It's okay. After that, he took a cigarette from the prisoner's hand. Isn't there a stand? The mirror was not as clear as the mirror. He lit another cigarette and asked curtly, "What happened?" Was a little listen to Boya playing the zither. No matter how unclear he was, to be able to meet his only bosom friend, and she urgently needed money about the handsome boss. He lifted his foot to walk. My comrade even sold his house in order to pay for my mother was about to step into the pavilion. The only good thing about him was that he was younger than in his previous life. They sold it for no matter how hard he was only 16 years old. If it were sold now, he comforted himself by thinking that it was probably a little angry. In the end, the money from selling the house was to prepare a basin of ink. I was also anxious. His ordinary face was accompanied by a huge rebound. I met the boss immediately. Completely gave up. In the end, I didn't get him dizzy. He was still dreaming of when he got up. He saw that on the floor, dragging a body full of injuries. There was also great talisman shining with purple light. I contacted a few of my former comrades that the bodies of a man and talisman were found outside the city. I wanted to take revenge. After an investigation by the authorities, they confirmed that the average fire and water was made from which bastard did this. In the end, they had probably encountered bandits and were killed. After discussing it, after the U.S. received blackmails for $1 million, they sent people to confirm the identities of the dead. We all came to his senses, and when she learned that Schweigeibau was dead, how could he say vulgar words in front of such a beauty? The boss was also timid. He felt that he really did find out who the murderer was. Jianjun said with a smile. When Yu Qianqiu found out expression, he could not help but admire his father's ruthlessness. After the officer shook his head over with serious expressions and unfortunately, it was too late when I got the maid as well. Imprison you. My mother didn't get the money. Beauty still ignored him and held him. Jianjun's voice became low. There were a lot of monks and downs. All kinds of noisy officer and she still didn't respond. So what if I'm a soldier? The father and son also pretended to be sad. If this was the anti-Japanese war, they did not need to be taught pride was to shed my blood for the country to be good at it. He walked out of the K-town crying for the past long after he left, but I can't about how the Schwab family was going to die out without insisting on the soldier's belief. Later on, she walked to the outside of the pavilion and sat down, but she pulled Yu Qianqiu and begged him to have themselves in those places and one of them could inherit the woman. Are they ordinary soldiers who protect the country? If Yu Qianqiu saw this girl, and he would definitely be shocked. Is this the reason why you betrayed the country the sister that he dreamed of? Several days later, after Schweigeibau, let me ask you something. The interests of the country and the people holding the white pods looked up and saw the officer heard his mother agitated. His scalp went numb. The armed police soldiers in the carriage looked at the two of them scared by his mother's cry. This was the first time they encountered Schweigeibau back then. Why? Harmed the interests of the country and found an excuse to hide outside. He said that I betrayed the country, and that's too sad that his mother had stopped crying. Please take back that word. Place a sigh of relief and sat down obediently. There used to be many powerful disciples guarding, but I don't dare to betray as if it bit her hand and stared at it in a day. Nowadays, the cultivation world is quite peaceful. Her eyes turned red again. It hasn't been tears held up in a traitor. Mother, if I had to bear this crime before I die, afraid that she would die again. Yu Qianqiu quickly changed the topic. Why did I see inside a woman? Why did you call me here? The few armed police soldiers didn't understand what Yu Qianqiu quickly changed the topic. She was imprisoned by the previous master 200 years ago. He told him the reason why she called originally for a while. She was imprisoned for 100 years. It turned out that the Shui family was established in the generation of Shuarenyang's great grandfather. When the time laughed, she refused to come out. The ancestor of the Shui family once saved there any use in that immortal helped the Schwa family to build a line was down to Jay's master later. You're saying she's a before he left. He told the Schwa family just a matter to help the Schwa family again in the future spirit that if they had a man for 1,000 years, they could naturally transform into a human a good man again. At that time, the officer couldn't help Schwa family still young looked at his disciple and honest. He never intended to ask for help from a mortal again. Don't tell me you fell in love with her. Let me introduce you to a place to read novels. When it came to the generation of Shuai felt you have time. He didn't dare to tell his eldest son about the novels there. Master, before he died, tell me quickly, he gave the jade the middle-aged officer nodded and said that there was a good man among his brother's children. Humans and demons are passed on to him. don't have any ideas about her. He would rather let the jade otherwise that they don't blame me for not warning her not far from their destination. Now that the only descendant of the family armed police soldiers there was no way to pass the jade. After reminding him carefully, he had been wearing a mouthful and has not wanted to use the jade pendant to make a deal with her son. He couldn't help but ask the officer, as long as her son promised she would not one of his children really inherit the Schwa family's bloodline. The officer nodded and didn't say anything. He couldn't help but sigh. In her hand to her son. It turned out the woman in the pavilion was really a white fox. After listening to his mother's words, Yu Qianzhou's eyes immediately she cultivated into a human form. She was injured by a pendant. No one paid attention. Fortunately, swallowed with difficulty. Maybe it was because they were almost since he found out that they were immortals in this form. Before he died, cultivated into a human form and leaned his head against the wall. He had never expected that this matter, which he had been unable to find a handsome young man, would be in the hands of his mother. The white fox believed this however, when his mother brought up the matter of adopting a son, the young man didn't know the true identity of the young woman. Came to his mind. In this world, the responsibility of having children was shocked by last night's stars have fallen in love with her. Didn't have a lot of people. They became husband and wife. I want to remember, but in the following day, the van slowed down and came to a sudden stop. When Yu Qianzhou went missing, the young man studied hard in order to dragged out of that his imperial examination. He looked up at the sky that had become overcast. If his son really had a promising young woman washed her clothes after the police and armed police he would be overjoyed. Hard work pushed him to the designated place to let someone else studying hard for 10 years. The executioner was loaded with bullets. At that time, the black muzzle was aimed at the prisoner. As expected, his finger got the decision on this matter. Just when he was about to pull the trigger, Yu Qianzhou embarrassingly said, the two of them didn't have a child of their own for many years. Who had already closed his eyes. Could also be the reason for the combination of human and demon. This child, purple bolt of lightning, the young man became the top scholar and the disciple felt his body go numb and gradually lost. Suddenly became extraordinary. Because I want you to before his consciousness Prime Minister of the Hua himself took a fancy to him and wanted to better for you to beg him. However, do I deserve had a life angrily, so he could death row prisoners' charred bodies. The Prime Minister was roundabout way to save the country. The police and armed police were all stopped in his heart and said, after the commander came back to his senses, he would call the forensic doctor over to check. Maybe father will agree. The top scholar was in a dilemma. After a while, the forensic doctor stood up and shook his head, and on the other side was a proud doctor. He didn't agree that day. It was really difficult in the blurry corpse. I told him about the commander looked at the camera in front of him. He couldn't resist the despotic power of the Prime Minister. He had recorded it. With the reason that he couldn't have children, he wouldn't be able to scratched his head and laughed awkwardly. He then took the executioner's gun and there's not so much pain that she wanted to die. Who knew that as soon as he finished speaking, he added another shot and tears you were executed according to the law. She silently accepted her husband's letter of divorce. It's happening again. Chapter 2. Although she was divorced, the young woman still loved the young man. Am I not for mercy? Waiting for him in secret. Jianjun didn't believe in the underlying. Although the Prime Minister's daughter married the top scholar, was that he was not dead. Died of illness. He struggled to overcome heavy slander. The Prime Minister was serious, shining brightly through the branches. He mistakenly thought that the top scholar was satisfied with his daughter and killed her. I'm really not dead. 2 days later, with the power of the Prime Minister, the father opened his eyes what would happen to a new official. A big red tongue was swaying in front of him. The white fox had something to do with such a good thing. When she was just adopting his sweetheart had been beheaded. It was when a big yellow dog. The white fox was heartbroken. The dog saw that he was awake and jumped up and down hundreds of people in the Prime Minister's mansion said anxiously. This matter shocked the whole capital. Then he felt very weak. How can the national master would struggle to support his body with his hands? So he invited the head of the owl before he could sit up completely. This led to the white fox after I down again. How will I face my ancestors? Bend for power. This women easily was hurt by love. Would Jianjun participated in the field survival that his mouth was about to break from all the very familiar with this feeling. Yu Qianzhou finally, but his body was so weak that he made it far from that. I want the jade pendant in mother's hand. He knew that the beauty was a fox spirit. He just survived from the government and now he was starving to die. He stood up and pointed at his following days, scolding. He couldn't have down now. Are you afraid that the jade stone cave was still dark? After we are although he had his everything in his body, Jianzhou couldn't help but come again. Do you still need to use your own sugar water would be good? He found the luminous fluorite. It could help him recover some of his stone cave last time. On the other side, obviously impossible. The person he finally knew what his father was. What should I do? And the sound of the zither was still here. Yu Qianzhou slowly walked over and stood looking around. He doesn't wildly looking at the face that could subdue all men in the world. He's too black-hearted. Who could tell that after standing saw that he was actually moving spirit from her appearance? It panted and leaned over. The sound of the zither was sad. I was startled. After Yu Qianzhou immediately shook his head and said, "It's a good thing." He actually felt that the sound of the zither was somewhat familiar. I never heard of an immortal being able to carry on the family line. His survival was more important than anything else. He couldn't help but sing along with the sound of the ground with his hand and carry on the family line for 1,000 years. The dog seemed to be very familiar with the fellow was worried about 1,000 years of loneliness. In his mind, in the dead of night, if you want to be anyone you read in his previous life, in the dim light, he had experience with this. Yu Qianzhou's thoughts slowly put his hand around for 1,000 years. Thus, the big yellow dog was not vigilant and 1,000 years of loneliness. It seemed to be quite happy and wagged its tail that not only could immortals carry on the family line, but they also had the story of a cultivation plan that had been passed down for thousands of years. You were poor and gathered all your strength on the stone when I left you. You were nominated for a fight on the dog's nose under his arm. Can I dance for you again? Father. He used up all the white you planned to become an immortal cultivation plan. The big yellow dog struggled for a long time after Yu didn't think that his son would lie slowly lay on the ground and to be able to describe the matters of immortal cultivation. The person in front of it as if it couldn't be alive. His emotions were sorrowful. How could an ordinary person know about this? Then crawled over with all his horse. He couldn't help but ask, and he wrapped his arms around the dog. What he didn't know was that when he sang the line, no matter how uncomfortable the dog fur was, Yu Qianzhou knew that his father in the pavilion had already come to the dog's neck with all his might. When he sang the line, I am the white liquid immediately thousands of years ago. The two of them immediately went inside that was only for that person, and not for anyone else. Body and used the big yellow dog's carcass as a pillow. Holding the sparkling and translucent jade pendant after the dog's blood tears slipped down her big side. Heat began to spread to his finally got his smashing onto the zither. He knew it would smash the jade pendant on the spot. When lay down and thought about what was going to leave back to his senses, he quietly waited for his strength to recover. He was surprised to find it doesn't matter if illusion was right in front of his eyes. Their eyes met. It was as if he stared at each other for a long time. I won't even look at it. However, Yu Qianzhou wasn't immediately understood, telling him to take a bath and burn incense. But why was he respect to the immortal? I found no reason for the executioners to let him go just like that. When Shuarenyang heard that the day before he was leave with the immortal member of the government, I wouldn't have made a fool of myself that was going to die this time. Or else she refused to hand over himself finally understand no matter what. It's no wonder those small singers resisted his father. There was a suspicious possibility. Voices were loud. He didn't know which brother had robbed the execution ground. But he had the guts. After a lot of effort, they finally got the jade. Although I only have one fan in the back garden, what the hell are you doing by leaving me here? Not bad. Not bad. After taking a bath, to death. Yu Qianzhou knelt there, excited and a big favor. Whether I'm a hardcore jade pendant and trembled on it was a good thing that he survived. At the last moment, he was worried about Qianzhou's heart in the Swiss bank, but he resolutely turned around and walked over. He was thinking about whether the jade pendant was really useful. He thought to himself, it was not good to stay here for long. He was thinking about whether the immortal would take him away. He needed to find a safe place to hide first. All kinds of strange thoughts came to his mind. Wait until I have recovered his strength to hear you. He should have the strength to walk. The white fox's eyes stood up tears. Yu Qianzhou thought to himself, she realized that the person in front of her was no longer there. Looked around and was stunned. She came back to her senses in front of the forest. In fact, not far nor near, the same thing stood an ancient city wall. She hurriedly shouted. Every time he could vaguely see people going in and out of the city gate. It could be seen that this guy was big sister over 1,000 years old. When he said the same thing for the seventh time, I'm scared. Shangui was angry. I'm so scared that my little heart and grabbed the jade pendant in his hand. I wonder which Dao brother did it. However, the jade pendant shattered on the ground so far away. It's really different. I wonder if it's safe here. She called out. The whole back garden became strangely quiet. So nicely. Jianjun slowly wiped out. Also stopped crying and looked around with her eyes wide. My heart resting against a tree when he heard a rustling sound behind him. was extremely pleased that his little plan saw an old woodsman walking out of the forest. There was a gentle breeze in the garden, and the flowers turned around. Laughed involuntarily. The family of three waited anxiously for a while. That this disguise was quite realistic. They realized that the white fox stood up and bowed to him. Young master, the legendary immortal did not to the person in front of him. Where did the song you sang just now carried the firewood and walked past a good figure. The latter frowned and said was enough to captivate the soul. Nonsense. No wonder the courage on his shoulders that I passed down from my ancestor was generated surprise. Your Shuarenyang was a little infatuated. This old man, the three of them were looking at the broken jade on the ground. Should there be a national right voice came from behind them. Jianjun was shocked. The three of them I heard about your story a few days ago and came to see a white-robed old man with white hair. Otherwise, it would be difficult for me to escape with my current strength. I especially been the old woodsman shouted at Jianjun to express my admiration for you. But in his heart, he prayed, "Where have you been all this time?" Yu Qianqiu reacted, "Old master, you have sent people to look for you. Such an awesome look, just like the ones on TV. Pretending to recognize the wrong person. It would be strange if he's not an immortal. This old man really has bad intentions." Master. With their son, he actually dares to play this game, and wife also knelt down without a word. "I'm a rookie. I have a presumptuous request. Don't blame me for being rude. I hope young master can acknowledge it." Wu Jianjun sneered as he looked at the woodsman, since you're the descendant of an old friend, there's no need to be so polite. Do you want to suck me dry? The old woodsman said passionately. "I won't do that." The young man said with a smile. The white fox come back. He was hesitating and was afraid that he would know he was dying of anxiety. She quickly added, "This old man's acting is quite so." The family of three looked at each other. "I'll definitely repay you after I master it." He even dares to call me young master and knelt down. I want to ask old immortal to take me as your disciple and bring me to cultivate. Master said that I'll be sucked dry by his mind boomed. The old man thought about it and realized that this was the other part of his request. Damn it. He walked to the pavilion and said generously, the events of young master can I get replaying in his mind like a movie. It seems that people in the past had his meal until the other party agreed don't talk about repaying me generously. The old man looked at him meaning there was a girl with a servant's braid looking at him. It's fine as long as we keep in touch. This girl was very familiar. It's so familiar that thing had set a tone call out relationship between the two of them. When the celestial master was singing just now, she shouted, "I was lost me a favor. Master. When I left to sing it again, I divined that his descendant was a little shy, so I shouted as she felt that this request was too much. I wanted to help Shua family resolve this disaster. To replay Qianqiu's heart skipped a beat. Now he could not believe that the shy beauty in front of him was the fox. He shook his head and looked at Yu Qianqiu. The causes and effects, young man, he not no memories in his mind. But your physique recalled a very ridiculous sad song. Immortal cultivation read about this matter countless times in online novels. Even if I bring you back to the mountain, you won't have any danger to speak of. Young master, you have to think carefully. I've learned a lot. If he was not mistaken, young name was now Yu Qianqiu. When Yu Qianqiu and his wife heard the rest of the richest merchant, they deeply started to play the son worriedly. The faint sound of the zipper could be heard. Before the person arrived, a lady's voice came from outside the door. He just wanted to go back on his footsteps. She sang a song that was even more authentic than "This is my mother's voice." What haven't I played before? The sound of the zither and the song. Do you think there's anything else in this broken place? Young master, the image of a benevolent woman appeared in his mind. The white fox stood up and could he find such a good opportunity after losing it? This girl-aged man beside the woman was looking at him after listening to a pirated version. This is my old man. She can actually sing the original version. The last bit of doubt in Qianqiu's mind disappeared. Yu Qianqiu felt completely speechless. He purposely looked at the broken jade on the ground and the crowd surrounding the bed in a daze. Not bad. From Yu Qianqiu landed on a young man. It was clear that he did not want to change. If Wu Jianjun was not mistaken, I still haven't asked what the name of the couple was really afraid that the old immortal white fox bowed and said, but they didn't know if they should say. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, the old immortal frowned and secretly thought that this kid really didn't know what was good for him. Young master said unhappily, since you are not willing to exchange, truly I will keep my promise. The Shui family was a wealthy family. I can't accept my life as Qianqiu because my identity does a daughter. After she finished speaking, however, she walked out of this another good teacher because the Shui family offended the government. They were just a little guilty. Their only son forced the Shui guys into a corner, sought refuge with his aunt. If I annoy he frowned and said, "He will just leave. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life regarding the arrival of this nephew in the pavilion?" First, the white fox. It was a close relative. Then let's go. And secondly, time it was an old immortal way to the big sleeves. The world is prosperous for a Shui Gai just stood up to say goodbye to his parents. It makes no difference where I am. Shui Gai Bao invited his cousin. His vision turned full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, but they ran into kidnappers. He could only hear the wishing sound beside his ears, and the latter was tied. Why couldn't help on but curse the old immortal's 18 generation ancestors in his sore spot. He found out from a small leader's head and smiled suddenly disappear in front of the kidnapper. He told her how he came to Mount Qianqiu and how he was lost and their son had been taken away by the old immortal. How it is. It wasn't the white fox nodded saw his cousin coming to the village in the depths of the clouds. Being able to meet the human world is blessed on the day his cousin came to the village. To do my best. I am willing to live in this after she finished speaking. She patted her chest. After biting off the rope, she opened her red lips. The man spat out a golden pearl. It covered an area of several thousand miles. The white fox, the big yellow dog, knew the mountain was steep and the forest was dense at the foot of the mountain. They finally arrived at the outscreen and immediately appeared around the pavilion. When they were on the place that was rarely visited, the white fox's jade-like fingers. What the world didn't know was that there was another secret which in the layer of ripples for some unknown reason. He possessed the body of the golden pearl cultivation squeezed out of the light. When he woke up, he didn't recognize that a ray of light streaked across and landed in front of him to save his life. Yu Qianqiu caught it and said that the big yellow dog saved his master's life. His eyes lit up. The white fox finally a little after holding it in for a long time. It was for this item that my husband's life was delayed around. Couldn't understand why his cousin feel endless regret. He could have obtained it, but it was a sea in every Jianjun couldn't. However, the whole found no doubt was shrouded in a layer of now that his only son was dead. When I was in prison, the family's cultivation had just reached the late stage of nascent soul. It really is like I have not cultivated for 200 years. Smiled kindly at now, I have unexpectedly reached the late stage of passing tribulation. He should be called Master Yu. As for the other uses of this item, son of a when you never studied the mountain gate, it seems like you won't give up on the vow. It will definitely have a miraculous effect. If I'm killed by you again, I'll have wasted all these years of being a big brother. I am deeply aware of thought to himself. Young master can directly you ungrateful thing. His little heart see how I'll deal with you. My God, the doctor said master took her pulse. He had never cultivated her body was still a little weak. So this old guy is not reached the late stage of passing tribulation. When he was in the same stage as day in my previous 200 years. After a while, gap only the serving maid was left in the room. As a person in Qianqiu did he say never many people bowed. His mind was still in a mess. Yu Qianqiu's thoughts were constantly even if they wholeheartedly cultivated, he needed to would rarely be able to smoothly cultivate. After some time, Yu Qianqiu finally understood the ancient kid muttered in his heart, if this place was developed as if according to the saying from the previous life, the head of Anguang, this was natural environment scenery, was only able to reach the middle stage of this ancient era did not belong to any dynasty. The mountain is truly a good treasure. He did not know what kind of place he had transmigrated at the top of the mountain. The white fox raised her head and gesture called the young mortal into the big hall. The former nodded and glanced stood up a little bit according to his understanding in his previous world. It came out of her mouth, and the old man's smiles here were no different from the strange times he had in his previous world. Smelling the faint fragrance immediately stood by his side. She raised her head and swallowed it. The others also sat novels in his but they all then dared to realize that this exercise item was very difficult to swallow. The old immortal should he try to use the white fox 100 years ago? If he really couldn't do it, a favor and showed my life was not pain in his throat. As if it was about to be torn apart. Descendant begged me to join. The golden pearl had already entered his body. In order to repay this favor, I can only bring this young man up the mountain. He was lucky enough to come into contact with it. To be honest, Chapter 9 is extremely poor. How Sansi leaned against the door. He's not suitable for cultivation at all. His disciple came back happily. I wonder which he was shocked to find out that there really were deities in this world. He didn't even greet him. Just treat him as an errand boy. It was something that everyone knew about. As soon as the latter entered the room, had even seen it before on the bed and covered his head like this. He stood one day, he went out to play and came to a green mountain and you actually want me to do errand boy. He found a peerless beauty with a sword on her back washing her hair. One day, I'll tear apart your bull asterisk. When the beautiful lady saw Yu Qianqiu, he was a good example. Yu Qianqiu kept cursing in his heart. She stood up to get out on his face. Cross-legged. Her clothes were as white as snow. Had to lower his head when she unsheathed her sword and stepped on it, turning into a ray of light. Looking at the group of old men, that beautiful face lingered in not many of them for a long time. He sat until no one was willing to accept him as a disciple. Yu Qianqiu was so after holding it in for a long time. He couldn't take it anymore. The girl was very back stood up and said, when he woke up, seen many beauties in his previous life. I don't have a disciple anyway. Treasure. But why didn't there be any none of them could compare to that fair didn't conform to the rules of the main character. It was something that could hard on junior brother. Another month passed. Quickly go and acknowledge the behavior of a man to be unable to get close to such a beauty. There was no smile on his face. Yu Qianqiu's heart felt like it was being cut down. Hurriedly ran over and cried out in sorrow to the sloppy old man. The maid in the room was a Yu Qianqiu pays respect to young master's cry didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Young master. After calling him thirsty, he said to the sect master, anyway, he had a lot of feces and urine these days. Then I'll bring him back. He got dirty easily. This maid's comprehension became a fertilizer supplier. The group of sheep congratulated him for taking it that everything he ate turned into waste. The old man smiled and shook his head. He asked himself, there was no other way. He also asked the white fox, the lad cursed in his heart, a bunch of bastards who suspected that this treasure was only effective for monsters and not for humans. As he breathed, he caught a whiff of the faint fragrance he was of a more and more sure of his guess. Glancing at the green grass, the master thought himself, which was there's something good about this place. The disciple behind quickly replied, it was the most nervous moment for the disciples of the last phase of the very training stage, and even suddenly thought of another problem. All the cultivators in the world that beautiful lady already had an interesting. With
The
such a
master
foundation
nodded.
building
There were probably many
decided by the number of
Cultivator.
matches.
The
It's
disciple
over.
immediately
Foundation
replied,
building pill.
to subdue demons.
It was an
uphold
indispensable
justice.
pill for
The master
cultivators
stopped,
to enter the
turned
foundation
around,
building
and
stage
interrupted
from the aura
him.
training
Don't
stage.
talk to me about these useless
It was
things.
refined by all the sects
Answer
with money
me
and
honestly.
effort.
The
If I
refined
tell you the
foundation
truth,
building
and you
pills
don't
couldn't
chase
meet
me
the
away,
needs of all the
I'll tell you,
disciples to pick up girls.
there was a big gap.
Do you understand?
A part of it would be divided
The disciple
equally,
thought this
and
in
the
his
other
heart,
part would be
but he
left
smiled
to be seen.
awkwardly and said,
The
Master's
new talent
eyes are
assembly
really
was
sharp.
created.
I can't hide my
All
thoughts
the
from
sects
you.
would send their strongest
To pick up
disciples of the
girls,
last
to be
phase of the
immortal.
aura training stage to participate in the competition.
The master turned around.
The more
and
matches
the
they
disciple
won,
followed.
the more foundation building
The two
pills
of them
they would
asked
get.
and answered, and
As for
gradually
how the
walked
various
away.
sects would distribute the
From
pills
the master's
after obtaining
words,
them,
Yu
that was their
Qianzhou
own
more or
business.
less understood on Guangsang.
For example, in
the master's name was Hao
every
Sansi,
participating
an
disciple was
eighth-generation
guaranteed a
disciple,
foundation
and was of the
building
same
pill.
generation as sect master Lu Chongqing.
In
As
addition
for
to
those
the
with
objective
higher
reasons for
seniority,
failing to
they
build
didn't
their
care about
foundation
worldly
building
affairs.
pills,
They
and
would
hid in the
consider
back
giving
mountain
more
to
to the
cultivate.
disciples who had contributed the most
Speaking
in the
of which,
competition,
Yu
and the
Qianzhou's
rest would be
seniority
dealt
was
with by
quite
the elders
high.
of the sect.
On Guangsang's
Chu
seniority
Ping'er
was
the
at the
10th
11th generation
disciple of
disciple,
Guangsang,
and when he met Yu Qianzhou,
her cultivation
who was a
base had
9th
reached
generation
the early
disciple,
stage of
he had to
foundation
call him marshal
establishment,
granduncle,
and she could be considered
Hao
as one of the
Sansi had
best
never
among her
accepted a
peers.
disciple, and Yu
The
Qianzhou
atmosphere
was
of
the
the
first.
sect preparing for the new
After
excellence
crossing a
assembly
courtyard
was
wall,
very
Yu
dense,
Qianzhou was
making
shocked.
people feel very stifled.
Looking around, the
This
back
was not
mountain
only
was built
related to
along
the amount of
mountain range,
foundation building
and there
pills,
were probably more
it was
than
also
1,000
related to the
houses of
reputation
various
and
sizes.
status of the sect.
To be able to build
10
such
years
a large
ago,
building
Chu
complex
Ping'er
on
was
such a
fortunate
high
enough
mountain,
to participate
one
in the
must have a lot of
competition.
power.
Because
The
she made a
evaluation
small
that Yu
contribution,
Qianzhou gave
aside
to
from the
Guangsang
foundation
was
building
one
pill
word,
that she
rich.
deserved, the sect rewarded
Looking
her with
along the
another
pebbled
one.
road,
The style of the
moon
houses
waxes
was
and
not the
wanes,
same,
and people
most
have
of them
their
had
ups and
courtyards.
downs.
The
If
houses
one
and
wanted to
courtyards
succeed
were
in
all of
building
different
one's foundation,
sizes. One or two
Hao
more medicinal
Sansi led Yu
pills might not
Qianzhou to a
necessarily
house that wasn't
succeed.
small, and the
There
courtyard
were many
wasn't small
reasons for
either.
failure. After entering, Hao Sansi
took
said,
two medicinal
I live
pills
here
to
alone,
build her foundation,
and there are many rooms.
but she failed one after another.
You can choose anyone.
Her mood at that time
Yu
could be
Qianzhou
imagined.
was a little dumbfounded
At
when
this
he
time,
entered. The handsome and
From the
confident senior
outside,
marshal brother
the
Lu
house looked
Xingguang
good,
appeared, but when he got closer,
who was
there
senior
was an
marshal brother Lu
indescribable
Xingguang,
smell, and it was very unpleasant.
He was the direct grandson of
At that
Guangsang's
time,
sect
he
head,
thought,
Lu
is this the
Chongqing,
smell of
and
the
most
legendary
outstanding
pills?
figure among his peers.
Now, he couldn't
He
believe
was also
it.
the most dazzling
Is this
disciple
the
of
smell of
Guangsang
cultivators?
during the New Excellence
The
Assembly.
stench of alcohol, sweat,
A genius
feet,
was a genius,
and all sorts of garbage piled up
Senior
to give
Marshal
off a
Brother
putrid
Lu,
smell.
who was given 3 foundation building pills,
took one and successfully built his foundation. Yu Qianzhou couldn't tell what they were.
who had a kind heart,
There were black
saw
piles
Chu
here
Ping'er,
and there,
who was in a
and they were
daze
almost
failed
taller
one
than the
after another
courtyard
in building
walls.
her foundation, so he gave one to her.
They emitted a messy
Chu
stench,
Ping'er really
and there
didn't
wasn't
expect
even a
that
single
Senior
weed
Marshal
in the
Brother
entire
Lu would
courtyard.
actually give such a precious
He
thing
felt
to
like
someone
vomiting
else.
on the spot, but in order to give his
Overjoyed,
master
she
face,
once again built
he
her
forcefully
foundation.
held it in.
She
He
finally
couldn't believe that a
succeeded.
living person could live in
From
a
then
house
on,
like this.
Senior Marshal Brother Lu
When
became
Master
the one
said that he
Chu
could choose
Ping'er's
any
heart
room to live
secretly
in,
yearned for.
he nodded with tears,
Unfortunately,
not because he was moved,
he wholeheartedly
but because of the
cultivated,
smell, thus fulfilling the
Using his
unrequited
own
love of
words to
many
describe
female
it,
disciples,
it was more
including Chu
king
Ping'er.
hot than cutting onions.
I haven't seen Senior Marshal
Yu
Brother Lu
Qianzhou
these
just
past
wanted
few
to give his
days.
master
I
the
wonder
word
what he's
beast.
doing.
Hao
Is he
Sansi
okay?
seemed to know what Yu
Chu
Qianzhou was
Ping'er,
thinking,
who was walking towards
He
the
took a
back
pot
of the
of
mountain,
wine,
couldn't
took a
help
sip,
but blush
and
when
said
she
with a
thought of
smile,
this. I haven't cleaned
The
for
sect
more than 100
prohibited
years.
disciples from
Just
flying
make
on
do with
swords.
it. More than
Although
100
Chu Ping'er
years
had reached the foundation
F
building
asterisk
stage and could
CK.
already fly on swords,
Yu
she
Qianzhou
still
finally
carefully
couldn't
walked
hold
through
it
the
in
thorny
anymore,
path that
and
led
ran
to the
outside
forbidden area
vomit.
below.
In the following
years
half a
ago,
month, Yu
Chu
Qianzhou
Ping'er
accidentally
accidentally
discovered
discovered
this
this
working
place.
spirit. He rested at sunset and worked at sunrise.
After seeing the imprisoned woman
During
in the
the
forbidden
day,
cave,
he dressed up
she,
as a ninja
who had
turtle,
always been confident
carrying
in her
bags of
appearance,
things that everyone
immediately
avoided,
knew who
and
was
threw them down
superior
the cliff.
and who was inferior.
At night,
It had
he
already
slept
been
in
a
the
few
wild
years,
forest,
and she
with the
hadn't
sky
spoken
as
a
his
single
blanket
word
and
to
the
the
ground as
imprisoned
his
woman.
bed.
One
Another
time,
half a
when
month
she was
later,
Sweeping through the house that was washed by Shui Chong looked brand new. She found out that the woman was a fox spirit that cultivated into a human form. Yu Qianqiu was shocked and amazed by her beauty, especially because she played the zither very well. He also understood why all the houses she felt a radius of 100 meters around his master were empty. It had been a few years, and she never got tired of listening to Twilight covers the earth. Every time she missed Senior Marshal Brother Lu but couldn't see him, sunset is poetic. She would come here. The dusk is picturesque. Thinking of Senior Marshal Brother Lu, it was still the same she couldn't help but quicken her pace. Under the setting sun, Smoke rose in spirals. She took out a fluorite and quickly shuttled through the dark cave. Yu Qianqiu hummed a little song, wearing a hat made of banana leaves. Someone is singing, and was very busy. The singing accompanied by the sound of the zither made her stop, and he was holding a brush. After a little hesitation, Chu Pinger walked into the grotto and covered her mouth in surprise. During this period of time, she really made a lot of strange things. That the woman who hadn't spoken a word for several years was actually self-evident. Chu Pinger flew to the pavilion and confirmed that her eyes were playing tricks on her. It's so bad. After a long time, she slowly sat down, holding a bamboo stick with her legs, skewering and listened to the woman singing the bitter rabbit meat. I'm a fox that has cultivated for 1,000 years. Under the moonlight, an old man and a young man were lying on two simple bamboo chairs. You were in the middle of the golden wine pot in one hand and eating roasted meat in the other. The vows of undying love turned into nothingness. Between the two of them was an oven, and the fire was extinguished, and could already imagine the past of the white roasted the roasted meat. The woman in white clothes could eat whenever they wanted, who was heartbroken, and it was very danced in the dark, looked at the man drinking and chatting merrily in the dim light. Don't throw away the bamboo only sticks hoping that he would look at her again. Please cherish the fruits of my labor. 2 lines of tears fell silently from Chu Pinger's eyes. I've gotten used to throwing them away. I'll definitely change. When she listened to it for the second time, she was choking with tears. How are my friends from abroad? When she listened to it for the 3rd time, she was already a complete lying on the chair, with tears streaming down her face, full of stars, and his heart was filled with 1,000 knots. She stood up abruptly because Mount Qingguang was relatively high, ran out of the grotto, but the sparkling stars were exceptionally bright. When she ran out of the grotto, Chu Pinger was still immersed in the story, and asked weakly, choking with tears, Master, I've been here that this kind of thing was too destructive to start teaching me cultivation. She wondered what next young to the master oven, you would think a drunken hiccup sounded out. Qianqiu. After a long time, I've already told finally stopped and looked at the cave behind the waterfall, and you can't cultivate at all. She only came back to her senses when she felt her face was wet. It's just a waste of time. She raised her hand to wipe it away. Do you think Master will lie to you? Full of tears. I really can't accept this. She couldn't help but stomp her feet and say, I came with a heart full of enthusiasm. My face is all turned into a heart full of grief and indignation. What if I meet Senior Marshal Brother Liu? What should I do? Even those 11th generation disciples she turned to look at the clear pool under the waterfall. Fine. It's fine. She seemed to have thought of something and looked around. When will these days come to an end? Behind the forest not far away. Don't tell me I don't even have a chance to turn things with his mouth wide open. Master. He also didn't know why. Even if it doesn't work, with Chu Pinger's you still have to let me try. Even the useless Yu Qianqiu won't even give me such a small chance. That face couldn't be any more familiar. As Xiao Wuqiu spoke, his voice became softer and softer. It was the fairy sister that Yu Qianqiu had been dreaming of, smelling the alcohol, but he didn't expect her to be on that he was already drunk. In this period someone kept shouting in his heart, he had been like this every day, getting drunk every night like his master. Then what is? In his low voice, one could still hear that repeated sentence, Master. What does fairy sister want to do? I really can't accept this. Chu Pinger walked to the side of the pool, sighed softly, took down the long sword on her back and placed it by her feet. The two master and disciple started her snoring under the bright starlight, revealing her curvaceous figure. When the flat ground slightly turned putting white, down her gown, the clouds floating halfway up started to untie the buttons already been dyed golden one by the sun that had just jumped out of the horizon. The clouds swallowed up the fog, and the clouds were overflowing with multicolored light. His mouth opened even wider, and he shouted in his heart to be sprinkled with a golden color. Continue stripping. Lying on the bamboo chair, as he wished, Chu Pinger, who was dreaming of meeting his fairy sister, revealed her creamy skin and forelimbs, as if he had been hit by something. Her slender legs were slender and elegant, the golden and her white that illuminated arms were behind her back. Just as he sat up, slender jade-like fingers pulled on a red rope. Needless to say, it was definitely Master, the legendary red doodoo. He stretched and casually picked it up. With me, are you? It was a book. Yu Qianqiu didn't dare to believe that the fairy sister that he had been dreaming of for the first time was actually putting on a strip show for him. Yu Qianqiu glanced at it and didn't pay much attention to it. He put his finger into his mouth and just as he was about to throw it to the side, so painful, he was suddenly startled and looked at it in disbelief. And at the bottom corner of the cover, there were two small words, elementary. I'll continue admiring. Wow. Yu Qianqiu jumped happily. The book in his hand was the elementary skill Chapter of Chapter 10, Mysterious Black Heaven Skill. Jade had long heard of it, but it was a pity that he had never had the chance. 2 red cherries jumped up and down. After being happy, he tightly hugged it to his chest, his saliva and murmured, turning around, protruding front and back, Master How Sansi was looking at him with a smile, beautiful bubbling. A thread of sparkling and translucent liquid came out from the corner of his mouth. Fellow was too cute. And his nasal cavity was hot and 2 streams of liquid flowed out. How Sansi laughed heartily as he returned out his tongue and licked his lips, said, although I haven't taught you anything. It was a little salty. I know that you have been preparing for cultivation these few months. The back of his hand was bright red. I believe that you should be able to understand this book, so you don't need me to teach you anymore. I have a nosebleed. If there's anything you don't understand, you can come and find me at any time. Who? Yu Qianqiu hugged the book, from the side of the tears pool. Welled up in his eyes. Chu Ping, he raised his hand just to wipe them away, into the water, and knelt down with a plop and kowtowed 3 times. She was scared out of her wits. In life, what could be happier than tasting one's desire? And hid behind the stone tablet. He kowtowed 3 times with sincerity, I've been in his heart. He really regarded Sansi as his master. Why would I have a nosebleed at this time? Yu Qianqiu stayed in his own room for almost a month, and he had already memorized the qi refinement entry-level cultivation method without saying anything else. Unless he was hungry, and ran up the mountain. He almost never stepped out of the courtyard. Unfortunately, before he could run far, who often pestered him flitted over his head, also didn't disturb him. Chu Ping, according to the cultivation method, his way. The first thing to do was to feel the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, long sword was and then absorb it and placed on Yu Qianqiu's neck. But this blockhead of a body spent almost a month, were burning with anger, he didn't even feel a fart. With one let alone the she could tell that this person did not have any cultivation. Thinking of the evaluation of him by the old fellows on Huangsang and the other old fellows, he was wearing on Huangsang's clothes. But he also refused to give up. Her voice trembled a little as she shouted, if he was the kind of person who retreated when faced with difficulties, he wouldn't have become the infamous boss guy in his previous life. 9th-generation disciple, there was a saying in a certain TV series that he deeply agreed with. We're on the same side. Don't abandon, don't give up. This girl was burning with anger. Another 2 months later, Yu Qianqiu was afraid that she would act impulsively and hurriedly explained. There was no reaction. The angry and ashamed period of time, he often encouraged himself with the story of the tortoise and the hare. The name of the trash Yu Qianqiu in But this feeling was not making any progress. No one could stand it. She had heard of him. Feeling that there was something wrong with his mentality, she did not expect that it was this person. He decided to stop and go out for a walk. It was impossible for an ordinary person to go up Mount Qingguan. He believed that there would be a day when that he did not have any cultivation into a needle. She thought for a bit and knew that what he said was true. He wandered out of the courtyard, looking at the shameless smile of the man in front of her, who was leaning against the door with a wine pot in his arms. Chu sighed and really wanted to stab him with her figure leave. He actually dared to peep at her while she was bathing, and along the way, he met many familiar and strange faces, many of whom pointed at him. In terms of seniority, this person was his martial uncle. Didn't go out much, but his reputation as a useless person had already spread throughout on Huangsang. Trash was trash. Those familiar faces, for example, seniority was the 2 11th generation disciples who were walking in front of him, didn't mind, had naturally conversed before. However, one of them she dared to lay a hand on her martial uncle. Grand Uncle Huangsang's sect rules were not to be trifled with. The other person said, it was not something that Chu Pinger, could Grand Uncle can't come out if he's not full. Was so angry that her whole body was trembling when she thought about how she was seen naked by this pervert, but she couldn't do anything about it. Of course, if she were to complain to the sect, Yu Qianqiu would definitely have to bear the consequences. But would she do such a thing? In this era of strict etiquette, if this matter were to be publicized, it would be tantamount to ruining her innocence. She was afraid that her sweetheart would never look at her again. Chu Pinger gritted her teeth and said, "What did you see? Don't be impulsive. Impulsiveness is the devil." With the sword on her neck, this girl's hands were trembling badly. Yu Qianqiu was really afraid of her. He first comforted her, then replied, "I really didn't see you take off your clothes." Ugh! He really wanted to slap himself. Pig! Since you didn't see it, how do you know that I took off my clothes? Aren't you looking for excitement? As expected, what did you say? Chu Pinger roared hysterically. Pain came from his neck. Yu Qianqiu felt the sword had already cut into his skin. He hurriedly said, "I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything." Silence. The 2 of them maintained this posture and stood there motionlessly. Wrong, Yu Qianqiu did not dare to move. He looked at Chu Pinger pitifully, like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, praying for mercy. After a long time, Chu Pinger's face turned cold. Words jumped out from her pink lips one by one: despicable, shameless, vulgar, scum, hooligan, beast. After that, she kicked Yu Qianqiu's chest. F***ck. The latter screamed in pain and rolled down the mountain. Dying under a peony flower, becoming a ghost is also a romantic. Which bastard said that? Damn it. If you have the guts, try it. Yu Qianzhou, who was lying in a pile of thorns, groaned in pain. After spending a long time, he finally got up. When he looked up, the tigress had already left. His body was hurting everywhere. The thorns were pulled out one by one. He walked back unsteadily. Who did it? Hao Sansi asked in a deep voice. His face was frighteningly pale. Usually, everyone looked down on his disciple. He also knew that it was normal to be mocked. His disciple was indeed too much. But daring to lay a hand on his disciple, he. Did he really think that he, Elder Ong Guangzheng, was a clay figurine? I accidentally rolled down the mountain. It's not anyone else's fault. Yu Qianzhou grimaced in pain. He. A footprint on your chest, a sword wound on your neck. You can even fall like this. Hao Sansi sneered. He grabbed his disciple's hand and dragged him out. Follow me to the green light hole. We're going to reason with sect leader Shixiang. Wait! Yu Qianzhou shouted. How would he dare to go to the green light hole? He would be chased down the mountain. Thinking that his master was not an old-fashioned person, he smiled bitterly and told him what happened. Actually, he did not want to say it. It wasn't something to be proud of. He had to say it. The old man's face was so black that it could bite someone to death. Of course, he emphasized that he did not intentionally see a beauty undressing. Hao Sansi, who was grabbing his disciple's hand, was stunned. His facial muscles twitched and he suddenly lost his anger. After a long time, he said, You deserve it. Master. Let's not talk about whether I deserve it or not. Help me remove the thorns on my back first. After a night, Yu Qianzhou suddenly found that his body that was riddled with holes had recovered. There was not even a scar. His swollen face had recovered to its original state. He could not help but praise Ong Guangzheng for being a blessed land. Not only was it rich in spiritual energy, but it also healed so quickly. He did not come all the way here in vain. Feeling refreshed, he walked around the courtyard a few times, stretching his muscles and bones. But the way his master looked at him seemed a little strange. As the saying goes, once a scar is healed, forget the pain. It was referring to people like Yu Qianzhou. These few days, he always felt that the scenery of the forbidden pool was not bad. When he had nothing to do, he would go there and take a walk. He comforted himself that he was going to see the white fox. The sunset was infinitely beautiful, but it was nearing dusk. Looking at the sunset, Yu Qianzhou returned from the back of the mountain in disappointment. Along the way, he was mentally prepared for the endless sarcastic gazes and words. To paraphrase a saying from his previous life, as long as you come out to mingle, there is no way you won't be stabbed. It was changed to, as long as you come out to walk, there is no place without sarcasm. He was already used to it. He walked back indifferently and passed by a pair of female disciples. When he heard what they said, Yu Qianzhou was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped. No, to be exact, it should be a song. If he did not hear wrongly, the two of them were singing, I am a fox that has waited for 1,000 years. 1,000 years of waiting, 1,000 years of loneliness. Even the tone seemed to be the same. Is there something wrong with my ears? How is this possible? Yu Qianzhou dug his ears. He must have heard wrongly. When I loved you, you were penniless and studying hard. When I left you, you were in the bridal chamber of the golden roll. Someone was singing behind him, and the voice was very loud, especially the words, bridal chamber of the golden roll. It sounded like two men were singing together. Although it was out of tune, Yu Qianqiu was sure that it was the song he taught the white fox. Turning around, he saw two familiar faces walking towards him. One of them laughed, "Yo! Martial Granduncle is here. You haven't heard the song we are singing, right? This is a song composed by Martial Uncle Chu Pinger. It is very popular in Ongquangsang." The other person laughed, "You are talking nonsense. Martial Granduncle doesn't have any friends here. Where can he go to listen to this song?" The two of them laughed and left, continuing to sing the song that was out of tune. A song composed by Martial Uncle Chu Pinger. Who is Chu Pinger? Damn it! I was the one who brought it here. How dare you infringe my copyright? Damn it! Yu Qianqiu cursed in his heart and shook his head with a bitter smile. He guessed that someone had entered the grotto and heard the white fox's song. Along the way, he heard many people singing the same song. Yu Qianqiu was a little numb. When he returned to the courtyard, he saw his master cooking the barbecue. He was a little embarrassed. He had not done any proper work recently and had not been filial to his master for a long time. He actually forced his lazy master to do it himself. He walked in front of his master and picked up the wine pot on the table. He laughed, "Master, you are resting. Let me do it. I am a fox that has been cultivating for 1,000 years. 1,000 years of cultivation is 1,000 years of loneliness." How Sansi nodded and let his disciple do it. Yu Qianqiu, who was drinking, was a little surprised. His master seemed to be singing. When he heard what he was singing, he couldn't hold the wine in his mouth and immediately spat it at his master's face. The two of them looked at each other, dumbfounded. Chapter 11. How Sansi's face twitched as he wiped the wine off his face and said hatefully, "Little brat, what are you doing? My throat is sore and I can't hold it in. I think the injuries from last time have not fully healed and I can't stand this smoke. I'll go back first, please forgive me, master." Finished speaking, he ran back to his room. Yu Qianqiu patted his chest. His master was almost 200 years old and he had unexpectedly started to sing. Although the action just now was unintentional, it was still very disrespectful. Master is a good person. Thinking about how Sansi had taken care of him during this period of time and had never put on airs as his master, he could not help but sigh. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, he continued his useless practice. This is... Yu Qianqiu, who had entered a state of emptiness, suddenly opened his eyes and his lips trembled as he said, "Spiritual energy." He closed his eyes again in disbelief. It really was spiritual energy. The substance in the air that made people feel refreshed was like a happy little fairy wandering around. Yu Qianqiu was so excited that he was trembling a little. It had been almost a year and he had been sitting in a dull and boring manner every day. Countless mocking eyes, was it really okay? Everything was for persistence and he firmly believed that he would succeed. Happiness came too suddenly and he did not dare to think too much about it. He stabilized his emotions and got rid of all distracting thoughts. Using the mysterious heaven skill that could not be more familiar, he breathed in and out the air. Since he could feel the incoming spiritual energy, he could also retain it and slowly infuse it into his 8 extraordinary meridians, circulating it in his meridians. His whole body was like a precise machine. The loose spiritual energy circulated for a few rounds and turned into a continuous stream of qi, flowing into his dantian like a river flowing into the ocean. The absorption of the spiritual energy became smoother and smoother, methodically circulating under the guidance of the mysterious heaven skill. With the influx of spiritual energy, the dantian, which was originally a ball, inflated like a balloon. Yu Qianqiu immediately felt his whole body warm and comfortable to the point that he let out a slight moan. The spiritual energy of Mount Qingguang was naturally worlds apart from that of the secular world. Otherwise, it would not have attracted the attention of cultivators and become their own. However, if he wanted to inflate his dantian in one go, it was not something that could be done in a short time. Yu Qianzhou, who was immersed in the pleasure, ignored the passage of time and focused on absorbing the spiritual energy. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed, but he was completely unaware of it. His disciple hadn't come out to eat for 2 days. Could it be that he was afraid because he sprayed wine all over his face? Hao Sansi was a bit worried. Cultivators who didn't need to eat were those who had reached the core formation stage and were able to abstain from eating. If mortals didn't eat for a few days, they would die. Is Master such a petty person? Hao Sansi's thoughts went astray. He was a little unhappy and decided to enlighten his disciple. He walked over and pushed open the door without saying a word. Yu Qianzhou was sitting cross-legged on the couch with a smile on his face. His forehead was glistening. He didn't look like someone who hadn't eaten for 2 days. He was in good spirits. The mysterious heaven skill is absorbing the spiritual energy. Hao Sansi's mouth opened so wide that a fist could fit in it. His face was full of surprise and disbelief. He stretched out a trembling hand and released a white true energy from his palm. The white true energy swirled and curled into Yu Qianzhou's mouth and nose. There was no need to think anymore. His disciple had already learned the mysterious heaven skill. Hao Sansi couldn't help but burst into tears. Could it be that God had opened his eyes? When he accepted Yu Qianzhou in the Green Light Hall, he was afraid that his senior brother would be embarrassed. He didn't want to embarrass his senior brother, so he did him a favor at little cost. Otherwise, no one would accept this kind of disciple who didn't have the slightest cultivation root. Ong Guangzheng had been in the cultivation world for thousands of years. He had encountered this kind of thing more than once. But who didn't want their descendants to live to 100 years old? What was the point of entering Ong Guangzheng? They all achieved nothing and died of depression before they reached 100 years old. People who didn't have the cultivation root wanted to cultivate. The gap that couldn't be crossed was still vivid. At first, Hao Sansi didn't care. He just accepted a disciple who did odd jobs. As time went on, Yu Qianzhou's tireless and persistent efforts moved him. He also deeply felt the unwillingness and bitterness in his disciple's heart. But what could he do? He couldn't help at all. He could only try his best to treat Yu Qianzhou better. He hoped that his disciple could live a happy life for decades. Was it really heaven rewards the diligent? Hao Sansi silently wiped away the tears on his face. Looking at the smile on his disciple's face, he was very comforted. Then he went out and left the door unlocked. He sat down cross-legged at the door. He wanted to protect his disciple. This was the key moment of entering the cultivation world. He must not be disturbed. As the saying goes, the sea can accommodate all rivers, and the sea is big. When a cultivator just entered the cultivation world, it was the key moment of forming the dantian. Usually, the more spiritual energy the dantian could absorb in the early stage, the larger the capacity of the dantian. This also meant that the future of cultivation would be higher. At such a moment, Hao Sansi didn't dare to be careless. In the cultivation world, cultivation was divided into 5 levels: qi refining, foundation establishment, core formation, nascent soul, and tribulation passing. Under normal circumstances, those who couldn't form their dantian for more than 2 days would have a hard time reaching the foundation establishment stage. Foundation establishment was possible in 2 days, core formation was possible in 3 days, nascent soul was possible in 4 days, and tribulation passing was possible in 5 days. Although it was said that it was possible, it didn't rule out other reasons for failure. However, this kind of calculation was basically true in the cultivation world. When Hao Sansi entered the cultivation world, he had formed his dantian for more than 4 days. Now, he had reached the early stage of nascent soul. Now that his disciple had formed his dantian for more than 2 days, it shouldn't be a problem for him to reach the foundation establishment stage. Yu Qianqiu sat on the bed. 2 days had passed, and he felt that his dantian had swelled into a ball. It seemed that the speed at which spiritual energy was absorbed had slowed down. He wanted to use spiritual energy to form a bigger ball, but he didn't have the strength to do so. He had read about forming his dantian in the Mysterious Heaven Method book, so he knew about it. However, he had reached his limit. Just as he was about to stop, he suddenly felt something moving in his chest. That thing seemed to be attracted by the vital energy in his dantian and slid towards it. When that thing drilled into his dantian, the originally small dantian suddenly squeezed something in, as if it was about to be torn apart. Yu Qianqiu was in so much pain that he was sweating all over. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. There was a loud bang in his mind, and an image appeared in his mind. In the white haze, a golden ball floated and slowly rotated. Yu Qianqiu immediately came to a realization. Wasn't this the golden bead that the white fox gave him that day? When he felt the pain of his dantian being invaded, he couldn't help but be stunned. Was the image in his mind the scene in his dantian? He saw the golden bead rotating, driving the white vital energy in his dantian. After it was stirred into strands of white silk, it was absorbed by the golden bead. F***ck. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. The vital energy in his dantian was almost completely absorbed by the golden bead. His dantian, which had not been shaped for long, was slowly collapsing. If this was really the case, then all his previous efforts would have been in vain. He wanted to stop the golden bead, but he couldn't control it at all. Damn it. I worked hard for a whole year, and now I'm back to square one. Yu Qianqiu hurriedly used the Mysterious Heaven method. A steady stream of spiritual energy was absorbed, turning it into vital energy and entering his dantian. Although the golden bead was small, it was like a bottomless pit, absorbing however much vital energy there was. Yu Qianqiu couldn't figure out what it was, so he decided to fight it with his life. If he didn't take advantage of the fact that his dantian was not shaped yet, then he wouldn't be able to have a high cultivation in this lifetime. The Mysterious Heaven method was used to the extreme, desperately absorbing the spiritual energy, and the golden bead was also doing the same. The man and the bead were stuck together. The 3rd day passed. How Sansi didn't expect this useless disciple to have a bit of talent. He released his vital energy again, and it was quickly absorbed by Yu Qianqiu. Knowing that his disciple was still blowing his dantian, he continued to guard him. The 4th day passed, and the vital energy was still being absorbed. How Sansi was a little surprised. The 5th day passed, and how Sansi was trembling with excitement. What did this mean? It meant that his useless disciple had the possibility of reaching the tribulation stage. Not to mention on Guangzheng, even in the cultivation world, how many people could have such talent? He didn't dare to meditate anymore. He guarded his disciple's door and looked around vigilantly. The 6th day passed, and how Sansi's forehead was sweating. How could this be? The 7th day passed, and how Sansi was a little worried. Did his disciple have any problems with his cultivation? The vital energy in his palm was just released tentatively, but in the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace and shot directly into his disciple's nose and mouth. How Sansi wiped the sweat off his forehead. How could a disciple who had just joined the sect absorb spiritual energy at such a speed? How could his dantian store it? You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.